Hello, and welcome to the sixth of this series of short films on foundational concepts in economics. What we're going to look at in this one is something called the knowledge problem, which is one of those areas where economists disagree. Some economists think that this is a very important part of the whole discipline, and that the knowledge problem is so important and so pervasive that you can't really understand the economy or how it works, or indeed how human society generally works, without making sense of it. Other economists, on the other hand, think that this is overblown or simply don't pay attention to it. So this is one of the areas where economists disagree. The big division basically is between the neoclassical mainstream of contemporary economics, the post-marginal neoclassical mainstream that really assumes away knowledge problems by assuming that we can consider the existence of a world in which everybody has perfect access to all of the information that they need to make decisions, so-called full information assumption. And on the other hand, economists, particularly one school of economists, who think that this is simply not a realistic way of thinking about the world. The economists who most think this are the so-called Austrian school. So-called because most of the founders of the school were in fact Austrians from Austria-Hungary or interwar Austria. However, many of the members of this school were not actually Austrians themselves. It's just become a kind of label that's used. Now, the Austrian economist, literal Austrian in this case, who is most responsible for developing the idea of the knowledge problem, is Friedrich Hayek. He published his thinking on this topic in several places, but most notably in a very famous essay published towards the end of the 1940s called The Use of Knowledge in Society. His basic insight is that there are two kinds of knowledge in the world, and it's very important to keep these distinct. The first is explicit or scientific knowledge. This is the kind of knowledge that scientists and economists who like to think of themselves as being pure scientists like physicists are most concerned with. Scientific or explicit knowledge, crucially, can be written down. That is, it can be expressed precisely without any real loss of meaning in either words or numbers. Now, what Hayek argued was that while this kind of knowledge undoubtedly existed, it was only a very small part of the total of human knowledge. Most human knowledge was of a different kind, and this knowledge was both dispersed and tacit. Now, to say that it's dispersed is to say that this kind of knowledge is local, it's circumstantial, it depends upon knowledge of very specific and particular local circumstances. It's not generalizable in the way that the first kind of knowledge is. It's also dispersed in the sense that it's scattered among the brains of all of the billions of people who live on planet Earth at any given time. Each of us has a very small part of the total of this dispersed local knowledge in our head. The problem is, how do we communicate that to other people? And if you're the person at the center, the government or somebody like that, how do you collect all that information from all of those people, each of whom has a part of it and may not even be aware that they have that knowledge or of how it fits in with the knowledge that other people have? So that's the first feature of this second kind of knowledge. It's local and it's dispersed amongst the entire human species. The other really difficult feature of it is that most of it is tacit. What that means is that unlike the first kind of knowledge, it can't be written down or fully captured in words or numbers. The only way you can really learn it is through direct experience or observation. An illustration of this would be the case of, for example, a recipe. Certainly, if you are a cook and you know how to cook a particular dish, you can write down instructions for how to do it in a recipe. You've captured some of it in words. But the words in the recipe will not fully capture what it is that you know about how to make that dish. A lot of that simply cannot be put down in words. Somebody might be able to observe you and get some idea of what it is, but even that has limits. And so the real challenge is that the bulk of human knowledge is not only dispersed and scattered amongst all the people who live in the world, a lot of it is also completely incapable of being expressed in written down words or numbers. It's tacit rather than explicit. Now, what this means, Hayek concludes, is that human beings everywhere face a knowledge problem. We are radically ignorant. We simply do not know, and none of us know more than a minute fraction of the total amount of knowledge that there is out there. Moreover, getting access to all the knowledge that is out there is not only incredibly costly and difficult, but actually impossible. You simply cannot do it. Now, there are additional elements to the knowledge problem which other economists have also identified and written about. One of them is the idea that some of the knowledge we have out there deals with things that are radically uncertain. This is the idea put forward first by the American economist Frank Knight, and after him we speak commonly of Knightian uncertainty. Some parts of knowledge are guesses or predictions that we can make about the future, and these range from the as certain as can possibly be, such as the sun is going to rise in the east tomorrow, to highly tentative and uncertain. But even in the tentative and uncertain predictions about the future that we can usually assign a probability to them. We can bet, give it odds, if you will. And this means, of course, that if it's risky, you can hedge against any downside. Now, what Knight pointed out is that there are certain areas of knowledge where we simply cannot assign any kind of probability at all. We simply have no idea of how likely something is or not. This idea has been further developed by the contemporary writer and thinker Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who, in addition to working on the mathematics of this, has pointed out that what this involves very often is what he calls black swan events. A black swan is an event which has Knightian uncertainty. You have no idea of what the chances of its happening are, but if it does happen, it will have an enormous and massively unquantifiable effect, which means that it's a very important thing, even though you may not know how likely it is. Another way of thinking about what Taleb says is that we are faced always, in addition to the problem Hayek identified, with the problem of unknown unknowns. There are some things that we don't know and we know that we don't know them, but there are also some things where not only do we not know them, we don't know that we don't know them. And that makes our whole understanding of the world radically limited. Now, there are a number of obvious conclusions that follow from this radically skeptical view of knowledge that Hayek, Taleb, Knight, and others put forward. One of them is, and this is the most obvious one that Hayek was very concerned to spell out, is that a planned economy is quite literally impossible. It's not that a planned economy in this view is a bad idea because it will have bad results. It's that it quite simply will not work. If you try to plan an economy, the result, according to this way of thinking, will not be simply inefficiency or a misallocation of resources. It will be complete chaos. Economic life will simply come to a stop. And there are historical examples to prove this, particularly the experience of the Bolsheviks in Russia between 1917 and 1923, when they imposed something called war communism, which involved the complete abolition of money and prices. The result of this was utter chaos and the effective collapse of the Russian economy until the Bolsheviks did a U-turn and introduced the new economic policy. So what you conclude from the knowledge problem is that it makes the whole idea of a planned economy simply beyond the bounds of possibility. This is because there is no way that any planner can ever get enough knowledge to be able to plan the enormously complex network of social interactions that we call the economy. The knowledge that this planner would need to be able to do that is dispersed and scattered amongst the entire population, and in any case, not capable of being written down, and therefore not capable of being collected. Notice that this theory about the nature of knowledge means that you can't resolve the planner's problem by simply having an incredibly powerful computer, because computers can only deal with numerical knowledge, knowledge of the first kind that's explicit. This is true also of the human brain, by the way, if you think of it as being a computer. You simply can't have a computer, no matter how powerful, that can deal with the problem of dispersed and tacit knowledge. It's simply beyond the bounds of the technology. Now, in fact, though, this critique goes further. What Hayek's argument says is not just that a planned economy is possible, it means that you have to be very doubtful or skeptical about all forms of complex planned order. It means, for example, that there is probably a limit on the size of large firms. Once a firm goes above a certain size, the managers who are trying to run it will face the same kind of knowledge problems that the planners of the Soviet Union faced, just on a slightly smaller scale. They quite literally will have no idea of what is going on in many parts of the company, and even more importantly, no real way or costless way that could actually be used of finding out what is going on. And so what this whole way of thinking about knowledge and the problems that arise does is to lead us to actually think that it's a minor miracle that any kind of complex order exists at all. But of course, it does. And so it also raises a question which we'll look at in the next program, which is that of how complex orders actually do exist, given the knowledge problems that human beings face everywhere and in every time.